Good evening, everyone. We're going to get started. My name is Marty Lyons. I'm the Assistant City Manager and CFO. I'm standing in for Dave Stonebeck, the Public Works Agency Director and author of along with Kumar Jensen, Paul D'Agostino, of the report that went to Council on the 11th, which prompted the desire for this meeting. Just by way of review, the city took the additional step of bringing all the information regarding our refuse, all of our solid waste, I'll call it that, contracts, to the council 2 weeks before asking for any approval. Normally, when you have contract approvals, those are done business by motion or sometimes by resolution, but never by ordinance. And so those are things that are put on the council's agenda and approved that night. And staff brought each of the items to the council with specific instructions or requests to the Administration and Public Works Committee to hold the items, that we wanted to have a discussion, to get initial questions, and then to bring them back on the 25th for discussion. What was generated out of that then was a desire to have another meeting offline so that residents would also have the chance to ask questions without the clock on, if you will. I mean, I will put a clock on for a really long, we want questions, not necessarily too much commentary, but it is this is an informational meeting, and we do want input. That is the whole point. As I noted just before we started, this is being recorded, and we will put the presentation online, and we will also have, of course, the reports that Mr. Stonebeck and his team generated on September 11th. Those will also go back to the council on September 25th. So I will be going through a presentation. It's not too long. It's about 15 slides. It talks a little bit about the program as is, then the RFP, and then based on council input on the 11th, options for making the solid waste fund more solvent and paying for all of our collections. If you were at the September 11th meeting, you may have noted that the first year RFP pricing was actually less than our current year. But it does have, all of the contracts have escalator clauses. And if we don't have any increases during the life of the contract, then the solid waste fund would head further into a deficit, and I'll get into that as we go through the presentation. So as the services we're going to discuss: residential refuse, condominium refuse, yard waste, commercial properties and the food scrap program, and recycling at large apartment buildings. As I hit each of these, we'll talk about whether they're already in place or whether or not we're looking at something new, because the request for proposal required that all vendors respond to our current services, but then we did propose alternates that they could respond to, but it's always up to the city whether or not they wish to take alternates. So our residential refuse program, 95-gallon cart plus a 30-gallon bag, or and or 65-gallon cart, and additional carts of any size are available. And I'll be going through this, and at the end are all the fees associated with these. So we didn't just leave the fees off to have you guess. I have a table and about 3 slides that shows what the fees for all of these are. If you're not aware, the city works with many other communities, and we joined this group a few decades back. Swank, it's pronounced, not Swansea, it's pronounced Swank, and we all take our solid waste, our refuse, to Swank, and by doing so have lower tipping fees than if we were taking it straight to a landfill. They aggregate it, then they haul it all the way to wherever the landfill is through a more, I would say, a more efficient process than us taking our packing trucks and driving them 40 miles. That would not be efficient on our part. And if we didn't do that, we would have to have our own large semis to then distribute it and have our own somewhat transfer setup, which would be difficult given our space constraints at Public Works. So as noted here, recycling material doesn't go to Swank, it goes to Groot's material recovery facility. Please note, so this is what I was talking about before, no changes of service are contemplated for refuse in this RFP. So if you had a certain size cart, that stays, and there is the potential, based on the RFP, to change the vendor, but the service stays the same. Condominium refuse, provide to owner-occupied buildings with 6 units or greater, 75% owner-occupied, twice per week collections. And please note that you have this size of a building, but you're still using carts. So this is different necessarily than somebody who has a, what would be my denomination of carts, a 3-yard, a 5, a larger dumpster at a commercial property. So that's why they are put together this way. And again, in this situation, the refuse still goes. In this case, Kumar, does refuse go to Swank, or does it go? So the commercial hauler can decide. And then recycling materials would be to Groot's material recovery. Again, we're not talking about a change in this service for what was presented on Monday night and will be presented again on Monday night. So yard waste, once per week by a contractor. If those of you who don't know, the city used to do yard waste, and we quit doing it because it was a large source of workers' compensation claims. Almost the heaviest thing we lift is yard waste. So by swapping out, and instead of doing yard waste and refuse, the city went to doing recycling, the lightest. We saved, we estimated hundreds of thousands of dollars in workers' compensation claims. So that, and granted, our vendor can still have those, but we think that our claims were higher overall than they were in the private sector. So yard waste in 30-gallon bags, the bundles for 4 feet in length, 3 feet in diameter, or you can use a 95-gallon cart, and yard waste goes to Groot's Elk Grove Village facility. And this is the table that I wanted to make sure that everyone understood. So this table is, I'm sorry, on the, yeah, this has all of our fees associated with each of them. And again, this will be up and online. This is where we are at right now. I'm going to let that one sit up there for a second, and I will also go back to it if anyone would like to as we head further down into finances. Happy to go back to the slide that talks about where we are at. I think it's also very important to note the number of units and number of stops for each, because our total solid waste fund operation is about $5.2 million. And it is all right in here, and this many stops and this many units. And if we have specific questions, I didn't introduce Kevin Johnson. He was hiding over there. He got away as well. He is our manager for solid waste. So I would definitely, if we have any detailed questions, we've got folks to answer them. So the bid items. Bid item 1, residential refuse. The alternates that they provided, pick up the carts plus an additional 3 yards. We didn't like the pricing. We kept the service the same. Alternate 2, contractor picks up cart plus any and all additional legal debris. Again, you might think that's a great all-in service, but it raises the amount of costs that we have as far as what goes to the landfill, because other than what we pay to the contractors, we do pay Swank for every ton that we take to them. So if we had something that was not volume-based in either one of the alternates, you would, if you had a 95-gallon cart, and you could just put a whole bunch of other things out there as well, there was the concern that our total volume could go up. So,
what was the annual cost?
Is what an annual cost? Yes, those are annual costs.
I'm confused though, because I thought we weren't allowed to put extra things out.
Right, that's why this is an alternate to our current level, and we're saying we aren't going to do that. Questions are great. If I answer them quickly, it's not because I want to move on. So please feel free to say, wait a minute, go over it again, and I'll be happy to. So again, so you see our quotation, $1,580,000 for that, Kumar, just to make sure I got, that's residential refuse collections. And then a low proposal for recycling, and that is the commercial, that's not our recycling, that is external. So that is the non-single family residential recycling costs.
Just condo.
Just condo.
And that's refuge, not recycling.
I'm sorry, it was Lakeshore Recycling, and I should have said it's refuse collection. Yeah, I actually was going to come back and say I didn't think we were paying $423,000 for recycling. Bid item number 3, yard waste. Alternatives. Right now we have an 8.5-month yard waste season in the middle. There's no yard waste collections when yard waste landfills are closed over the winter because they can't actually spread and compost and do things with the material. So we looked, though, at what would happen if we shortened it. That reduces cost. It may be in spring, we start later because there's not much to pick up then. We chose not to do that. Also, the alternate 12-month food scrap ride-along. Food scrap, for those of you who don't know, is something we've studied quite a bit. We would really, Evanston is a green community, a sustainable community. We would really like to continue to add to ways for that material to be composted rather than thrown into a dump right next to a non-recyclable material. Yes, sir. I'm sorry?
So the term,
Sure. And we should, I'm sorry, I took all those questions without the microphone.
So the food scrap ride-along program refers to a service where if you already have a yard waste container, or you're allowed to put yard waste debris into that container, the ride-along component means that you would be allowed to then put food scrap into that yard waste container that you already have, and it can ride along with the yard waste in that service. So it's not a separate container.
Food scrap is riding along.
Exactly. You're not riding along. Nothing else is riding along.
And so, Kumar, would it be fair to say that we could have used the ride-along language in the bottom line, that the 8.5-month food scrap, that is riding along?
Correct.
So just so you understand. Go ahead and grab the mics and we'll start trying to.
So now it's showing that Lakeshore Recycling is now awarded this contract, is that correct?
That is the recommendation, and the council has not voted yet.
But today it's grouped, correct? So there would be a switch?
Yes.
Okay.
And I believe we are not changing any containers as a part of that switch. So there's, as far as impact to a resident, there's not some, and it's an issue on commercial when someone wants to replace their dumpsters and all of that. We have to do a lot more planning. The low proposal of $623,677, and that is an annual cost. Again, the not recommending the alternates, that was a great question because it's the 12-month, adding the winter months to the ride-along, when we're actually saying we don't even have the yard waste for 3.5 months. So that's why it is listed that way.
This goes back historically. I'll give a little comment to it, but the comment is when the city, I don't know how many years ago, this has my 3 to 5 years ago, the city went back, the city assumed a certain number of yard waste stickers would be sold. That number never materialized. I believe the deficit was probably $500,000 possibly. And now you can correct me what the number was, but I believe it was that high because it was just a number that wasn't good. But now we're looking here at a $600,000 number for yard waste. That's the city employees. What is the cost? What did the city? I thought the city employees picked up the yard waste.
No, we moved yard waste 3 to 5 years ago because of that workers' comp I just discussed, that we didn't want to be lifting the heavy materials any longer. That is a paid service to group.
Okay, so they're picking up the trash.
Yard waste, and they're picking up the trash.
What are the city employees doing then?
Recycling.
Okay, that's all. So I guess I was going to ask the question then, each one of these is basically a business against each number. Are you lumping this together to look at each number? Because the way I understood it before, some of these numbers weren't, there'd be like the city employees number and whatever they were getting. How did that compare to like the contractors' numbers and this? I mean, as an analysis.
If I understand your question, did we put the residential recycling out to bid against the internal employment costs? Is that the question?
Yeah, I think in that sense, because I wanted to understand how these.
The answer is no. The city, when we made this switch, and even before that, originally when the city elected to outsource recycling and keep refuse, there was a goal to have to not lose all of the city jobs. We do have Evanston residents in the streets and sand, the sand part of Public Works. That there were also Evanston residents working, and that was a previous governing board decision to say we would like to keep that in-house. And then several years later, we made the switch to still keep the majority. I think we went down one or two jobs, but the majority of the jobs in-house, and go to recycling to save funds on the operating costs and workers' comp.
So in a sense, what you're saying, though, is we're not really running a business here. We made a decision based on we wanted to keep employees, which wasn't necessarily a business decision, but you want us to cover the cost of it.
I know I didn't say anything of the kind.
I didn't say that, but that's what.
Okay, well, but you said what I'm saying, and so I did not say that.
So.
I have a question. You gave the numbers of properties or homes that pick up the recycling, which is effectively the same number of units as refuse. I mean, not in the yard waste I'm speaking to, as the residential numbers. It seems to me that there are not that many places there are not that many homes that actually use yard waste. And in particular, because Evanston has a high number of greens people.
We do a lot of composting.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about the lawn services that service a lot of the homes.
We also have a lot of lawn services.
So I'm
yes.
wondering, what is the actual number of units, and how often are those units actually putting yard waste out for pickup?
Yeah. So for the clarification on what the number of units mean, so in this case we're talking about residential units, not necessarily buildings. So you may have and for yard waste, it's the combination of the residential refuse and the condominium refuse. All of those residential units and stops are eligible for yard waste. So the yard waste column is essentially the total, and so if we think about the number of stops, that's the number of buildings that could have a yard waste cart. There are 12,714, and of those so they can have either service, but the number that actually have a cart and pay for the annual cart service is about 5,800. And in those 5,800 units or stops in this case, there are about 6,200 carts. So most only have one cart, some have more.
But this is an important part because, as another resident pointed out, the yard waste does not operate at a balance. The fees we are charging for yard waste do not cover the costs, period. And that goes to the $25 cart fee, not to buy the cart, just the annual pickup fee and the actual sticker price. And if you're just putting out a paper bag with a sticker on it, neither are, when they're both added, they do not cover the operating costs. And that's part of this analysis. And actually, there wasn't a suggestion. It was just a piece of information in the report. Was that a sticker price would have to go up to $5.50 or about $5.50 to balance if we were using all stickers. So that's and we know that there are many communities with between $3.50 and $4.50 as a sticker price already. So while that huge jump sounds unbelievable, the price for stickers has gone up a lot. Yes, sir.
I have a concern relative to, how ecological are we being if a truck goes down an alley and picks up one bag or empties out one cart, and that cart is half full or whatever. And so, I mean, we're putting a lot of diesel fuel out on the street, and to what end are we doing it? And has there been an analysis in terms of what would be a more efficient collection schedules, less than, in an effect, could actually lower the proposed cost of this?
Well, I thought we looked at biweekly at some point. Not for yard waste. And going to a historical metric for a lot of cities was going to the once a week was seen as a great concession, because you still have some communities that pick up twice a week, mostly for refuse. But when the city went to once a week, that was definitely a cost-saving maneuver, and it does save costs. But we will make put the comment in the record about going to a longer period, and it doesn't have to be monolithic. Depending on the costs and how we structure it, can you do weekly in the fall and biweekly all other times? As I had one alderman, not in this community, Alderman Rainey or Suffredin, but another alderman once said, "You've got computers, sir. Go figure it out." So, did you have another comment?
So one thing I will say about that is in this contract for residential refuse, condominium refuse, and yard waste, we do ask that contractors commit to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions profile by 3% each year of the contract that they hold it. And so one of the challenges that we've had prior to this language being in the contract is that we don't have great data or information on what that impact is, and we also don't have exact information on, when a truck goes down an alley, which containers it's actually tipping and which containers have something in them and which don't. And so that would be that's a more sophisticated approach that we're certainly looking to do. And we also do require that the new containers that are purchased are what are considered to be RFID capable, and so that's a little chip that gets put into a container that can be read if you have the right technology. And there's a handheld reader, and there's also a truck reader. So when you're driving down, you can actually collect information on whether or not it's being tipped. Some are sophisticated enough with the trucks that you can actually weigh it as it's being tipped. But the RFID technology is mostly a tracking and participation tool. But we don't have that yet. We're getting there.
Well, a 3% reduction a year increases our cost, doesn't it?
Actually, we certainly hope not. Our goal is for them to go through some of the same analysis that Mr. Genshin just talked about, that if they can figure out a way that for 25 stops, the per stop tonnage goes up, they are saving money in diesel. So that, and then therefore they're reducing their gas emissions. So, but it also could be more simple things. What are their routes? How are they handling their overall collections? We've stayed away from trying to determine what kind of truck they do use. That is another thing, that you could have a truck with multiple purposes. So they go down the alley once. So there are other things to do, but those kinds of solutions do have costs. If you say, in order to get the Evanston business, you have to bring in a new fleet that they don't have in use everywhere else, at least our first round, I'd say our first 2 to 4 year cost would be higher as we purchase that technology for our services. All right, I'm going to keep going, and again, we will come back. So bid item 4 was a standalone food scrap program. This is a new service that applies to commercial, since residential customers are able to replace in the yard waste carts. This was fairly complicated because we do already have collective resources providing this service on a basis that is not our 65-gallon, not our 95-gallon, but they have specific services that, how many clients?
In Addison, we have altogether about 195.
So we have 200 residents that are already using this smaller, and the containers are small. It's much more contained. The health department would say they loved it because it has no chance for that food scrap material in a yard waste to ever become a health issue because you pick it up, it's sealed, it's a very clean process. But it is a price above and beyond our other costs. What we're saying in this, as far as residential goes, now a resident will be able to take the food scraps for 8.5 months out of the year, toss it into the yard waste container, and have that picked up at the same time as yard waste, or they can do the subscription basis. And then Kumar, why don't you just help me with the commercial side?
So what staff is recommending is that the standalone food scrap program be offered to commercial customers or commercial entities in Evanston. And so the way that the city breaks up its different solid waste services, at the moment for most of them, we've only bid out residential contracts. There's a whole nother group of buildings out there that are under the commercial franchise. It's a totally separate contract, also held by Groot, so it can be a little confusing.
And that contract is not up right now.
Correct. It's not up until 2020. And so this program would apply to those buildings, to the buildings that we're not talking about today. And so the idea behind having a service specifically for those buildings is because the yard waste program, the food scrap right along with the yard waste, they're not eligible for that program. And so as we were developing this, we wanted to make sure we provided options for all of Evanston's customers and user bases.
Thank you, sir. We talked about the 3% greenhouse. What are some of the requirements and goals in the RFP to hire one Evanston resident in the contract to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 3%, to provide reports and attend meetings quarterly? At the last contract, I was involved more deeply with direct negotiations, and we talked about cameras on trucks and taking better pictures of what's actually happening so we understand what's going on if we have a rash of missed pickups or things of that nature. This contract goes further on that regard to say we're going to put bonus and penalty. Please, we realize that this bonus and penalty is not large, but you won't find them in all contracts, so you have to start somewhere. And if Groot, when you see that 168 to 192 missed pickups a quarter, how many pickups do we have a quarter? Annually, it's over 100,000. So it's this translates into 99.5 or 99% pickup efficiency, that they're not missing pickups. So while 168 to 192 sounds like a lot, remember it's 12,000, whatever that was, 800 residentials every week. Take that number alone, we'll just take that number, that's a little over 1% for that number alone. So I think my math on the fly is pretty good there. So again, $1,800 a bonus, $1,800 of penalty. Neither one covers the staff time involved in tracking down and taking care of penalties and bonuses. So giving them a little bit more of a bonus does not reflect, we will save more money in staff time than that bonus. And if there's penalties going on and we're above that 192, we will be spending more time tracking those down through 311 and other sources than the $1,800 they'll be paying us. But it's a start. Yes, sir.
Can you explain the purchase of spare containers? What is that all about?
When we have spare containers as a part of our monthly fee, if we need to have spare containers at the city level to replace a broken container, we have those, and we're not dinging. The vendor can't charge us for those. They have to provide it as a part of the service. And Alderman Rainey?
Marty, if a person only uses yard waste stickers for their bags or has no cart, there's no charge of any kind affixed to their water bill for yard waste pickup.
Correct. Did everyone hear the question? And that really happens through the resident going to Jewel or wherever and picking up a sticker and putting it on the bag, and the transaction is recorded by the city, but it's really with our vendor and Jewel and the resident to transact that, and then we keep track of all of the stickers used, how much money they have gotten paid, and put it into the overall analysis of how are we doing. And to Mr. Riskey's comment earlier, we aren't using enough yard waste stickers to make the yard waste program run in the black.
But my point is, if a person has a mulching mower and never uses a yard waste bag, does whatever with his, his branches, then they never get charged for yard waste.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Just want to.
Yeah.
So you can avoid all yard waste charges by not having a cart and by mulching your yard.
And the direct comparison is, if you don't use a gallon of water, you're still going to get a water bill, because there's a service fee for a minimum, because we need to maintain the pipes to the residents. But in the case of this, if you don't use it, you do not pay for it.
One of the things about yard waste is that we're a city of trees, right? And many of those trees are on city property. And of course, there's a huge ordinance about blowing them into the street, and we know why that's a bad idea. I just see that the price of going up to $5.50, which is 2.5 times or whatever it is currently, is sending the wrong message to people that actually take care of their own property, take care of their own yard waste, and don't compost themselves. And face it, maybe it raises the cost of caring for your property in the fall to rather dramatic levels, probably $20 or $30 increase in order to take care of your leaves. It seems to me that there can be an opportunity here of shifting the cost of that yard waste program onto the direct cost of it into the cost of refuse pickup, and also sharing the cost across the commercial units, across the entire city, because a lot of what residents do that take care of their own yard waste is take care of city property and the leaves that involved there. So I really would promote the idea that cost be driven down by increasing the cost of the regular refuse collection. And then another point is, why does a city need to pick up food scraps for commercial properties?
I believe that the overriding reason is it's sustainable. That refuse, unlike refuse that needs to be contained and will not break down for many years, that goes into a landfill and is safe. The biodegradable, that's an old school term. Kumar, what should I use? What term should I use? All right.
Biodegradable is fine.
But that terminology, that waste breaks down in the season, and just like the clippings. So we want that extra tonnage out in that field and not in the landfill.
And so a point of clarification about the commercial food scrap program, the city is not actually paying for that service. So the actual we will be set is through the bid process. We set a negotiated rate between the city and the hauler, and then it's a subscription-based service. So any eligible property, in this case it's commercial property, can opt in and subscribe for that service for however many containers they want, however many times they want it picked up, and they can stop that service as they want. And so the city's not actually involved in that portion of it, and so the city's not really picking up food scrap from commercial properties in the same way that we are through the yard waste ride-along program. So there's a rate structure that is provided, and it's based on the size of container that you have, which I believe in the proposal we received, it's just a 32-gallon container, and then the number of times that container is picked up a week, and the number of containers that you have.
And back to the residential, again, the yard waste fee isn't changing because food scraps are in there. Your volume could change if you, Kumar, what's the answer to, can I put my fried egg in a paper bag? That is a stickered paper bag.
No, you cannot. You mean a yard waste bag?
Yes.
No, you cannot.
So there isn't that where we have to worry about that kind of waste sitting in a paper bag as opposed to being in an approved container that is a little bit more rodent proof.
guess my point is the commercial properties should be bearing more of the cost relative to waste collection, in particular yard waste and residential food scrap waste, in that the residents are caring for city property and city
Oh, I understand this.
And so
You're
it's-
maintaining more parkway per resident than any of the commercial properties are.
Exactly. And, we're all
Understand.
contributing to it. In fact, it's my fear is that people are going to not like the idea about 550 and start using the regular garbage collection for their waste. And who's really checking that? And it won't be in paper bags. It'll be in plastic bags, and nobody's opening up plastic bags.
Right. Thank you.
Has the city done an analysis, like Wilmette? They come around and they basically take your leaves once or twice during the fall cycle and take them away. These other suburbs do that, a lot of them. Has the city done that analysis to look at that, really, the reduction of take all these leaves? I suspect you haven't, but that's a different cost than what you have here.
You referred to the reduction. The reduction of what?
Well, what I'm saying is that's a different strategy of how they're taking the waste. Up in Wilmette, they come by with big trucks with vacuums. They suck up all the leaves. The residents push them to the curb. The city comes by and takes them all. I see that in Wilmette. I think it's in Winnetka, all along the North Shore. You don't have this yard waste cart system. You have that. So I'm asking, and then I think maybe they have bags if they want to put out branches. I see bags out there. But what I'm saying is, have you looked at another analysis for the cost?
We have not looked at the windrowing costs of all of the yard waste into the street. We do, and just so we're clear, fall leaves, we do pick up. So it's,
About the street, because your machine's taking, but you're not taking what the residents put out. Wilmette, the residents are putting it on the bird.
Understood. It is, so the short answer is no.
Up its own recycling. I guess that was.
Right, and I mean, I shouldn't say right. Different philosophies. Right now, the city would like to, part of it has a lot to do with density, too. We want the time for the crews. We've chosen to outsource the operation. Given our current size of people, we would then do that analysis. How many more staff? How many more pensions? How many more trucks would we bring in-house to compare to how much the vendor uses? Because they're also, we're using trucks to pick up carts and we're using trucks to pick up bags. So I'm in no way saying one has more or less. I'm clearly saying we haven't done the analysis. We had a question in the back, and do we have one over here that I ignored? Are you sure? Yeah. Okay. Well, because I'm.
Yeah. Well, so at the moment, food scrap goes into a container, a 95 or a 65 gallon container, and can sit out at the curb for 6 days, right, until it's picked up. That's that.
And I'll handle the one part. We did talk with the city's health department before moving down this path of having that the food scraps in with the lawn clippings or in with the leaves, and they said if it's in the container that it's supposed to be in and it's picked up on the weekly basis, they did not have a concern. And those are the folks that are a part of, they are our team that goes out and handles all of the rat abatement. So. And we do try and get better carts all the time for that purpose. But we would have to acknowledge that if anybody in town hasn't seen a cart with a hole in it. All right, I'm going to I've got just a couple more slides. I think I had 14. So recycling at large apartment buildings. We're looking, as you can see, we have more than this amount, but we are looking at, we do a pilot program, 6 units or greater, looking at another 150 apartment buildings with 6 units or greater do not have this opportunity. We're recommending, to your point about charging commercial, that they in fact start paying for a per unit fee for the recycling. And I think that's important. It's per unit, not per cart. So we're trying to recognize each place you're going to get charged no matter what, so you might as well recycle. So we're going to jump into a little bit of the numbers. 6 years ago, a little bit less than 6, but well, it was 6 years, 2011, the Solid Waste Fund was created because we already had a water fund, we already had a sewer fund, and the 3 things that were on a water bill, we call it a water bill, but it has 3 things, solid waste, recycling, water, and sewer. And they call those enterprise funds. They're supposed to operate like a business. And in this case, the Solid Waste Fund, when it was originally set up, you had an operation, and I'll do some round numbers. If the operation was $5 million, it was less back then because we've had some inflation, but a lot of the costs of the solid waste operation was subsidized by the general fund, meaning sales tax, property tax, income tax. All these taxes that went into our general fund were used to help pay for this operation because the fees were not high enough to cover it. When we made the change to a solid waste fund, the city chose to only raise the fees high enough to pay about 80% of total costs. So go back to your $5 million analysis. That meant the general fund still had to give $1 million for solid waste operations. It was in a new place in the city's books, so we had to do this transfer of $1,055,000. With that transfer, every year, the solid waste fund operates at a little surplus, meaning that we chose the right amount. It originally was $1,245,000. We've been able to cut it down because the operation operates at, again, a little bit of a surplus with this help. Well, our goal is to have an analysis where we look at the rates to determine whether we should have another revenue source other than this internal transfer between one fund and another. We should pick an external revenue and make the solid waste fund operate like a business. And that's what we're going to talk about right now. And one other very important point is, even though our rates, I started it off this way, our rates for 2017-18 are going to be less than 16-17 by just a little bit. They will then go up 2% or more a year, and we have to account for that. So, at the council meeting, we talked about a few options. The council did not talk about a do nothing. We have just provided that as, if we do nothing, here's over time with the next contract, the gains that the solid waste fund has had over the last 5 years in trying to erase its deficit will be lost. And I'll have a little table that shows that. So in order to cover the costs and make the solid waste fund a business fund, you can look at a variety of revenue sources. One is to change the fees so that the fees cover all of our recycling, all of our solid waste, all of our refuse, all the costs. Another way is you could, the general fund used tax dollars, you could use tax dollars in the solid waste fund to do the same thing. Say we are going to have a tax along with the current fees, and that's how the solid waste fund will be solvent. And it'll look a lot easier to understand once I show a couple of tables. And then and then another option is to do a mix. So you could raise the rates to cover it, you could raise a tax to cover it, or you could do a mix. The purpose for looking at a property tax increase is property taxes, if you're itemizing, are deductible on your income tax. whereas payments for a yard waste or for any of these containers is not deductible. So what does it look like? You remember me saying it was a $5 million operation. So you can see in 2018, total operating costs just under $5 million. And what we are looking at is we had that negative $800,000. When we started out in 2011, that negative 800 was a negative $1,455,000. So the fund has operated in the black, but started in a big red hole. So we've operated well over the last 6 years, but this is where we're at. So 2018 revenues, if we keep doing the transfer as it is, we will eat into that balance because, as I noted, the fees are actually going to be a little bit less for 17-18. It starts November 1st. So that's good news. But you can see right away in 2019, the fees go up, the transfer stays the same, and all of a sudden we're just barely balanced and no longer reducing our deficit. And in 2020, we actually fall behind another 110,000. So that's the thought process, that if we don't change our revenues, and it's important to note, what we're saying here is the fees that we have now are the fees we'd have all the way through this time frame. No changes, even though our costs are going up. So given that, what would it look like if we had a mix of property tax increases and rate increases? So this is, I know there's a lot of numbers up there. Again, I'm Marty Lyons, I'm the CFO. I'm happy to, you call 311 and get a request into me. I'll be happy to explain it. Dave Stonebeck and I worked on this directly. He can explain this as well. But when you look at this, we're looking at a fee increase in this one of 9%. And then that's the proposed increase. Tells you then, the middle column tells you the 2018 rates and what will be generated. And then down at the bottom, sorry, not at the bottom, but right dead in the middle, you see $205,000. The city's tax levy, just the cities, so not the library, not the schools, just the cities, is just over $40 million. So a 0.5% tax increase is $205,000. You take that, and that goes across all residents. And you take that and you add it into the equation, and we go from 800,000 down to a negative 321. And we don't do this just so on paper we can have a lower negative balance. We do this because we're evaluated on how we run our city, and operating with negative funds gives us lower bond ratings, does not make the CFO look like he knows what he's doing in general when you operate this way. But the goal is to bring this fund into a business environment. Yes, sir. Well, Kumar, they're under commercial, so.
Yeah, so Northwestern has an exemption, and so they contract for their own solid waste services entirely.
We had, when we did the commercial franchise, there were probably very few exemptions, but Northwestern was one of them. There were a few other businesses that got exempted as well, and sometimes it was because they were part of a national franchise, and they already had a national contract with someone. So we didn't make them choose the Evanston commercial franchise. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I see things will change and price will go up. I see that. My question is, what about education? What do we plan to educate people to know exactly what to do? Because I know I didn't know what to do when I came here. I'm not from here. And I had to be educated, and I'm lucky enough to have someone at home that knows what to do, but I'm not sure how many people know that. So what is the plan for education?
My educator, Mr. Risky, you're not my educator. Mr. Jensen is.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think for different programs, you need different types of education, and so the city has a lot of materials that are specifically related to recycling, and so we do work to disseminate those materials. We have been doing some more web-based things, like we just did a recycling educational video that focused on a few specific items that were that we deemed were harder for people to kind of understand as to whether or not they were recyclable or what to or not to do with them. If we move forward with any of the food scrap operations, that's definitely going to require a substantial outreach and education effort, and we would certainly anticipate that not just being, including something in your water bill, but also including some additional information and opportunities for interaction. So attending ward meetings and trying to work with particularly some of the larger properties that may be rolling out this type of service. So it takes a lot of different things. We're certainly anticipating, if that service is approved by City Council, that there's going to have to be a large educational effort that's going to have to go with it.
And we would also continue to use social media and other tools for those many thousand residents who've signed up for Twitter and Facebook, et cetera. One of our great successes is those that sign up for the schedule for when we're going to be doing street cleaning. And you get a text that says, move your car. You don't have to know what the sign said. The text says, move your car. And that helps. Our ticket revenue went down, our complaints went down, and I think that from an educational standpoint, we would also continue to use that to say, "Did you know?" Or if we have a change, especially as Kumar pointed out, the food scraps. Please, if you use a cart for your yard waste, consider putting it into the yard waste. And that's important. A big part of that is, we didn't talk about it, but we pay SWANK for all the tonnage that goes to that, but we don't pay a separate fee for what goes, that's all included in our pickup, right? So if it goes into the yard waste, we're not paying for that tonnage, we're paying a per stop fee. And so the more we can get into the yard waste stream and out of the refuse stream, the less we pay at the cooperative agency called SWANK. We've got Mr. Risky as the, go ahead, sir.
Okay. Marty, what I see here again is, with all this analysis the city does, with the city's analysis always wants to take the money. What I don't see in any of the city analysis, and I've talked a long time about the water rates and the water department and how it operates, which is going to be the billing source of this, and you know my position on that. This doesn't tell me all the cost. You haven't showed me any of the costs anywhere, really, other than the contracts. You haven't showed me the cost for the recycling, the city cost. I'd like to see a lot. Cost. Do you have better breakdowns of everything here that we can look at?
We can provide that. We can provide the independent. So by program is what you're asking for on the cost.
By program, and unfortunately, you know that I don't believe the city creates real costs in a lot of things, and there's problems with that. So, that's my position. That's my opinion, of course, and you have a different one.
What do you mean we create costs?
I say you do not have real costs collected on many items in the budget. I mean, there's political things here that are going on too. So, but what you're basically, we're in a budget hole again because of what's happened, and you're looking for a source of revenue to pick this hole up, and this is one of the sources you've come to, and this is what's happening.
A question of cost. So the cost is actually the 1 million plus the 5 million? Plus
no, that is a mix. The cost is just the total operating cost. The 1 million is what helps us to pay for it. We're trying to show on this slide how the transfer combines with any other fee. And remember, this is do nothing, meaning that the costs are this. So I asked staff to not give me a table that had so many lines that the font went down to this. So we probably could have had one more line in here that had operating revenues, operating costs, and then you'd have seen very easily the source of the changing from 800,000 down to 621. And instead, we just plugged in that it's inferred that the 5,165,000, that revenues will be 5,000,000 about 400,000, and so we can go ahead and make that adjustment in the presentation. We will go ahead, and what it would be is closer to, in the current year, that year, it's going to be about 4.4 million plus 1,055,000 minus the 5,165,000. I'll add that line.
On the next slide, I was confused because it doesn't really show like the tax, overall tax.
Oh, no, it does. I'll show you. Sorry, yes, sir, and then Alderman Braithwaite.
The question came up about how new residents know what to do with the different programs that we have. And you have a number of sources, but it requires a new resident to be actively seeking out that information.
We do a new resident postcard still.
A
So if we
postcard?
yeah, we say, and our postcard, it used to be you'd get a new resident booklet that was this thick, and it's gotten so small because it's a card that says, here's the link, here's where you go for all the detail. If you don't have a computer, here's the Evanston Library, here's all the places that you can get access, or please call 311 and we will walk you through everything you need to know.
How do you know who is a new resident?
We do track real estate sales, and anybody who's coming in that has a water bill, we know.
Okay, all right, because I was going to
Transfers, and so it can get challenging in our multifamily and commercial units with renters moving in and out. And we do try and reach out to everyone on that subject. And in some cases, as you've seen, we haven't had a lot of programs, so there wasn't even a program necessarily for them to be involved. So as we expand that, we will expand the education. Alderman Braithwaite.
Follow-up to John's statement that he made, and because I know we keep good track of those numbers, is there a place in the budget that's online that would break down the expenses, the total operating costs, or is that something that you can provide at a later date? Because I agree, if to try to put all that information on one slide gets to be difficult to read in a large setting like this, but how do we get that information out to the public or the folks that are here that are interested?
We will do, I won't guarantee if I opened up the budget book right here that every line was covered.
Right.
So we will cover by program what the costs are
That'd be great.
and the revenues.
Perfect.
And then depending on if we like that look, I'll change the budget to also make sure it says that going forward.
That would be helpful. Thank you very much. And then where does our waste go? So right now, we have a waste transfer station. Someone asked me that question. I wasn't
Yes.
able to answer. So where do our waste go? And
Depends on the kind. So our refuse goes to Solid Waste Agency of Northern Cook County and then off to an actual landfill, so it's aggregated. And then, but for recycling, go ahead, Kevin, take it.
Well, recycling goes to Groot's Materials Recycling Facility in Elk Grove Village.
And yard waste?
Yard waste goes to the same location.
So, and with our change, if we have a change, will we change where that's going? Groot will still be Groot for refuse?
For recycling. And
Sorry, for recycling.
Lake Shore will take it to their own facility, the yard waste.
Thank you.
so then my last follow-up question is, Marty, currently we do not charge our residents for recycling.
Correct.
So then how do we,
Kumar? It is included in, to a point earlier about we should raise the refuse to cover certain costs. That's what we do now, and I would submit to you in some respects, our in-house recycling is about $1 million, the business unit, and it's right there, the general fund transfer. So that's still being paid for out of taxes and not out of fees.
thanks. Thank you.
You got some more questions over on this side?
Recycling should be a revenue source instead of a cost. How have we, as a city, tried to flip that around so it's more revenue positive as opposed to cost negative? I mean, that goes to education and also, types of materials. They're commodities, right? They fluctuate. So
Correct.
when you set something up at a certain time, it may change. So how static is that program? And I guess where's the deficit for recycling? Because that seems like an actual opportunity to reduce costs and raise revenue. But like you just said, it's $1 million of cost for recycling right now.
Correct. And the cost, the recycling, you really summed it up very well. It's a commodity. It changes. What we would get for a truck full of aluminum is not what we would have gotten when recycling was the rage. And this city went all in with the recycling center. And we abandoned that and went to this because the revenues associated with recycling have just gone so far down. Coomer can address some specifics as to why that is, but we do not. We get, boy, what's our payment back? About 140,000 or so as our recycling payment back. We have a recycling payment
Yeah,
back.
we do have a recycling incentive, but it's much lower than
Much lower?
140,000.
So we do get a check back for all the recyclables that we deliver, but it does not come anywhere near covering our costs. We can. That's something that you have access to a lot of industry reports that says what's happening to municipal recycling and what can you do and what can't you do. If we were doing recycling outsourced, it would just be embedded in the cost, and we would see probably a net for that revenue, but we would have it as a line item on the invoice, but it still wouldn't cover the costs on an outsourced program either. But it's a fair question because this community prides itself on recycling, and our recycling levels actually went flat, and we want to get them back up. Sure.
So if the recyclables are going to a MRF, municipal refuse or recycling facility, it's being mixed with other communities. So how would they be able to determine the quality and I guess the quality of our recyclables and potential for revenue?
That's definitely him.
Okay, because that would my point is then if you want to raise the volume for recyclables in the city, that seems like a problematic situation where you can't. How can we tell Evanston recyclables versus Skokie, and then I guess.
It's a really good question. So to that specific issue, yeah. So all of Evanston's recycling goes to a large facility to mix with everyone else's, and so the reports that we get back from that facility don't tell us what Evanston's specific numbers are. They do tell us the tonnage of how when the truck comes in how much it weighs, and when the truck goes out empty how much it weighs. So we do know from a weight standpoint how much we have, but from the standpoint of how do we make improvement on that? One thing that we do have in this contract is what are called waste characterization studies. And so this is an analysis that the haulers will be doing on the garbage stream to try to understand what the makeup of that garbage is. So to see if there are things that shouldn't even be being landfilled that are making it in there, how much of that waste could be recyclable, and that gives us a better understanding of what the potential is to increase, but it doesn't necessarily tell us exactly what's in our recycling stream.
I appreciate the question. I think, in my mind, the simple solution to that, should we ever go down that path, I'm not suggesting that, just to make it clear, is we charge for our waste cans, which you see on your water bill. So you know the difference between, I think it's 65 and 85, and the cost that's associated with it. So for the recycling bin, we don't charge. And a resident who has a home, not a renter, can have multiple recycling bins. In fact, we actually encourage that to be the green town that we are. So the simple answer would be, I think if we wanted to come up with a way to recapture money, would be start charging for our recycling bins. Right? Am I oversimplifying?
Yeah, well, that would discourage usage. If we started charging for our bins, then we'd say, well, I'm not getting charged for my refuse bin. I'm just going to put it in the refuse. Not for all the refuse bins. If you break one, we replace it.
But it's a monthly charge on our.
We charge it to pick up what's inside of it, but we don't charge for the bin itself. And that's
correct. It's a monthly charge on our bill, and so to clarify what I'm saying, you would then, an option would be to charge a monthly collection fee on the recycling containers themselves.
And I do think, though, I mean, you had a good handle on the recouping of the costs, and the technology continues to improve as far as how these carriers can sort. And for us to, whether it's infrared, what are some of the technologies is they've got lasers, they use optics and sort. Well, but the idea, what I would say is
if they don't know what we're sending versus another town.
Well, I would just go to that step and say, we hit the scale, it's 5 tons. For the next, when this 5 tons goes through, the computer registers everything that goes through, scans it, and says, this was Evanston.
Is this a conversation you guys are having with Groot?
It's a conversation we've had. It's not included in the tech that they have, but they have an incentive to do this because they also will make more. The idea is that we then need to get it into the contract as a deduct. So until they offer the and this technology, I talked with them about 3 years ago at the start of the last contract. So it is out there. But again, if you're the first one into the pool, you're paying for the tech upgrade. And it's going to benefit us, but so we just need to watch the market so that we're on the cutting edge, not the bleeding edge. You have a question over here? I'm sorry, Clerk Reed, you had a question? Okay.
So Groot's not the only recycling center in town. I mean, has there been, I mean, I know obviously that they're doing the commercial recycling, so that makes sense that that would be going there, but, Lakeshore has a recycling center. I don't know who else has a sorting center where, so, I don't know if that's something that will be looked at as
Sure.
far as competitive pricing.
We can go ahead and look at the costs at each location on a per ton basis for that sorted.
Yeah, well, I would also just say to Mr. Kaplan's question, I think from the research I've done, the way to increase revenue from the commodities that are being recycled. So, for example, white paper. So white paper, if it's clean, is one of the highest priced commodities because it can be reused pretty easily if it doesn't have grease or other sort of contaminants on it. The issue, as you noted in some of our email communications, is that there's contamination of that stream, and so the way to increase the price of the commodity at the local level is for us to source separate and then sell that stuff off, separately to paper mills or whoever is going to take that. In terms of increasing the revenue from the commodity. And we just opted not to do
Well, and what's the cost benefit on source separating for our labor and our equipment here versus all into one? And that's part of the thing is, can it be source separated more efficiently at a transfer station at that place? And we're so small compared to a larger operator, we think that it would be better for them to be able to, again, as you pointed out, count our truck, source separate. That was Evanston. Next truck is in from Skokie, fine. It's got a RFID that goes to them. And this is a matter of us working that part of it as we move forward. I do want to try and get to, we're at about 8:15. I wanted to try and get through. Usually this happens to the CFO. His financial reports show up at the end of the council meeting and he doesn't get through the financial report. Again, do nothing means that we're not going to make headway, and it won't go away. We will end up with a future budget deficit that we have to try and figure out. So to your point about where is the property tax, so in this one, this is a mix. The first line is, you can see a 9% rate increase from $17.95 for the 95 gallon to $19.50 and to $8.65 for that year. And then you go down and you see that there is also changes from $25 a cart to $50 from yard waste stickers. No, we're not saying go from $1.75 to $5.50. It's a gradual, just recognizing we need to work on it. And then taking the general fund transfer from $1,055,000 down to $700,000. But literally have a direct deposit of property taxes of $205. Remember I said that our tax bill was about $41 million, so $205,000 for that 0.5%. You put those together and we go from $800 down to $321,000. you think that, gee, did we have to make that big of a jump the first year? Well, remember, the costs will keep going up. So the amount of decrease we have over each year does that our headway gets smaller. You go to 2019, the rate is still the same. We're spreading it out. So if the rate doesn't change, you can see what happens. We add another $205,000 for another 0.5% property tax, but the costs went up such that our gain went from 478 down to 302. But we've almost got the solid waste fund balanced. And again, our goal was to do this on a slow curve, that we're not trying to jump up to balance and ask for $1 million to balance the solid waste fund. We're going to do it over a few years. So lastly, what happens if you keep the rates exactly the same, get rid of the general fund transfer, and put a 1% property tax increase in each year, 18, 19, and 20. So by the end of 20, that's a 3% increase in the property taxes. And that goes a little bit slower, and you can see our gain is less, but it does keep moving us in the right direction. And we may need to look at for a next contract or for 2021 for rate increases. We did look at, for the most part, our rates are average, and you'll find other rates for the monthly hauling. Some of those that are much higher still involve 2 times a week or backyard collections, those other additional services. Otherwise, we are right in the middle of the pack for services. So this part, again, this wasn't an answer to how do we get solid waste fund self-sufficient over the next 3 years so that it's not a budget hole and that we can operate that as a business. And this is how we do it. So this last one is all rates. So if we didn't do anything with property taxes and put it all on the rate, it's a 9% increase from 17 to 8, an 8% increase from 18 to 19, 0 in 2020, but you can see what happens. We go from 800,000 in the red, down, and then back up again. The first year we don't have an increase because costs will go up. And our costs will go up. We have labor agreements with our public works staff. Those costs will go up. So this is not just villainizing our contractor for wanting to have a minimum cost increase of 2%. We do have, there's a lot of labor, there's equipment that gets replaced. We would love to see the technology bring those costs down, though, as well, that if they can use better trucks, use smarter equipment, then, we think about all the ways that this equipment can be picked up. Remember at one point in time, how long ago that we had 2 to 3 people on a truck, and now 1. And that's all technology driven. So those are huge savings that we've had. Really appreciate everybody having good questions. And again, if you have questions, I'll get everyone's here. If you have questions afterwards, then please get them to 311 or to Kumar, myself. But please get them to us. That way we have them for the next council meeting. Yes, sir.
How do we make sure all the potential service providers knew about these RFPs?
We advertise for the RFPs per the city's purchasing policy. So we advertise and make in local paper, and in Demand Star, which is a service that all the big carriers look at because a lot of municipalities use it. We had a very competitive process, and sometimes Evanston can be a victim. We think our location is always an asset. Sometimes it's not. If it's hard for a carrier to get in and out of Evanston to where they're delivering their waste, our costs can go up, as opposed to they can't go east. And also, there's no customer on the other side of us for them to also go get more, to lower their costs. So we had other questions. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. So I'm curious, because you did mention Collective Resources 5-gallon bucket service. And Kumar also said that there would be an offering for every property. I'm I'm concerned if the 5-gallon bucket program is not offered and educated along with the other programs, that there will be residents and other properties that are eligible for the yard waste bin that will be taking it just for the food scrap. And since those containers are not washed regularly and the problems that that might cause, I really, you talked about how happy the health department is with how they're enclosed, and so I'm curious about that.
I just said they didn't have it. They gave it its. They said, let's try it. They said, yes, they are happy they're closed, but they know that every container is an opportunity. It's how we collect regularly. For the most part, our problems do not stem from regularly collected and regularly stored. It's the refuse that's outside of a container that is the issue, or even the non-food scraps, something that is non-perishable but is garbage and it's just been sitting for 2 weeks. That's the harborage that is created as much as what's inside, because that's I think the health department's biggest concern is that we have a home for rodents, and they work on that quite a bit, and that's more of a long-term issue than if we pick it up every week and it's inside the container, we will be in good shape. And again, I did give a clear plug that the small, the service is tighter. I mean, it's tighter than a food scraps inside a yard waste. No doubt about it. And I heard the request that we should do advertising regarding that program. Very good choice of words. My apologies. I know you're not asking, but that was definitely Freudian on the part of the finance. Do we have anyone else? All right, Mr. Iskey.
Go ahead.
What I want to ask, since you believe the source should be the taxes, raise our property tax, this is going to go against the water bills. Now, the water fund takes $3 million out of it, transfers it to the general fund. You'll say that's for operations. Now, we have new contracts. We've got new business. So we're supposed to have this so-called profit that, we've been to enough meetings. I heard all this profit was coming our way. So you're taking this out over 5 years. Why aren't we taking some of those profits and using them to help pay for this, since it's going to be on the same bill? And it's going to come out of the same fund in a way. It's not the same fund, but it is the water fund.
No, it is not the water fund.
Well, it's a taxing vehicle. But
it is not the water fund.
I understand.
Okay.
But the issue here is really, we're supposed to get this big profit, but you want to tax us. But and that's been my issue for a long time with the water fund. The water fund is not a business either. Unfortunately, it's claimed to be a business by the city, not operating as a business.
It's claimed to be a business by our independent auditors as well.
Your auditors, that's another question. But I think the other issue, Marty, that you're not telling us, when you did the budget presentations on the Capitol recently, you didn't put Robert Crown in basically the budget and the cost that's going to be, and you're not going to cover the full cost. So our property taxes are going up because the gifts are not enough to cover the cost of that. You didn't even bother to say it was $30 million or $40 million or whatever it was. That wasn't even there. So we're not just talking about property taxes here. We're talking about other property taxes that are going to increase with this too. So there's a bigger property tax increases to come. So when the council thinks about all this, they better realize this is not just the only property tax they're going to be looking at on these, and as a total tax. And that's all I have to say, because there are a few council members here.
Sir, and then in the back.
My comment, since there are council members here, is that we really don't need another tax, invisible tax, that we're paying for, that 1 or 2 or 3% that'll eventually go towards refuse collection. It seems to me it's a much more clearer message to each individual citizen or homeowner or resident in the city, is that if they're paying for refuse collection, that's what it costs for refuse collection. And if it's buried within the taxes, suddenly everything else gets mixed up and we have no idea where the real costs are. And it gives us an opportunity or a responsibility to keep an eye on what the costs are. I mean, that's practically I drove, what brought me here is because here was the actual cost of what, where this stuff is going. So I would very much oppose to making it a mix of taxes and and costs.
And not giving an opinion one way or the other on that, a clear way that a resident can control their refuse cost is to choose the smaller cart and recycle more, and their cost went from $17.95 down to $8 something. So right there, it dropped by more than 50%. We had the gentleman in the back.
Are there any suburbs nearby that are making money recycling? And have you studied them to see what they're doing differently than Evanston?
Kumar?
Not to my knowledge, no. Not strictly from an operations standpoint. No, I don't know of any that are making a profit encompassing all of their operations.
Even, I mean, the profit, that would be really tough. It's even covering their cost. And I know that's what you meant, but even breaking even, and if you know of one, I will go study them tomorrow, immediately.
How about ones that may, I hate this thing. How about ones that, not making money, or sorry about the term, but that don't, what's the term? Right, that may not break even, but like even by just a smidge. Well,
and again, we really want to know about those that have literally any higher recycling contribution back to them than what we're getting, because we would want to. That goes into what another person, I forget, that there's more than one game in town for the collection of the recycling. So we will look at that, because it is kind of a net. How much is it for us to give you the recycling? How much will you give us back for the valuable materials? That's our cost, and we definitely want to know. So we will look, and we'll put that in as a follow-up to our research on what are other communities getting. And our haulers can help us with that. If they're giving somebody a better deal than ours, we find out, it's really a lot better for them to tell us first than for us to find out through a survey process. That's a very good way to change haulers your next contract, when somebody is not being upfront. Every private contractor deserves to make a reasonable profit, but not one that counts on their client not paying attention. That's not something the city wants to have happen, ever. Alderman Braithwaite.
The gentleman in the yellow shirt has a lot of good questions. So as a follow-up to his question, in a hypothetical world, if we did put it was your comments. If we did put the balancing number on our taxes, which is only 12% of your tax bill, by the way, just a reminder, would we then put a line just like mosquito abatement, Oakton, blah, blah, blah? Nope, it would just be mixed in with the general levy?
We would request and demand, and the county has been reluctant to add items to the tax bill. We did get the library in because it's such a standard. We have pensions because that's a real hot button. But GA, we were able to. So I won't say no. It's quite possible that if we had what would be deemed an environmental levy, or we would put some title to ask for it. I go back to what I was always told: you have computers, you should be able to make it better. Our goal is to not. More information is not always more knowledge. You can really crowd out someone's understanding when the tax bill starts to get too Byzantine. So.
And just a quick question of clarification: if the council were to choose to do this through property taxes, that would spread the cost out across the city, commercial, and not just, because this is only for funding for the residential stream, correct? And so this would also spread the cost out to
every section, every service that we're talking about pays its own fee. So, to the extent that, but I'll give you a situation: which of the commercial buildings where if we don't have a service and we put it onto a tax bill, then the commercial property is in effect paying for something that they're not getting a service on. It spreads it out more, but from an equity perspective, there's a little bit of a disconnect there.
Essentially. All right. Thanks. That's
But, I mean, the making the glass half full, the residents are taking care of a lot more Parkway than that commercial, I remember, that other property. We will remain after in case somebody didn't want to make a comment or question, and we'll be happy to take those as well. This has been recorded. We get to go watch different kinds of movies. We get to watch this movie again and take a lot more notes on it in the next week. Sure.
Isn't the cost that's not, the cost that the cost, because you're not putting it into a landfill, can you attribute that cost savings onto what would be the cost that you get back from recycling? So that
I think I got your.
Yeah.
I could do an analysis that said the tonnage of recycling is X, and the amount that we pay for our refuse at Swank is Y, and really, if all that recycling went into refuse, my true cost is X plus Y, and yeah, it's a lot more. So that is a really good measure of what do we get out of our recycling. We're not getting paid back, but it's not going into our waste stream. And that Swank expense is $600,000 to $700,000, maybe a little bit more a year. So just to get the garbage that far, then it's another amount to get it further, all the way to the landfill. Thank you very much. We will be around afterwards.